Thank you, Carlos, for this kind invitation, and I'm happy to be here, and I'm very proud to be part of this great webinar. The anatomy of the PIP joint is about this today, and in 1987 there was the first volume of the series of Churchill Livingston, Hand and Upper Limb. This was the first book of this great series, and the topic of this book was the interphalangeal joints by William Bowers. And William Bowers wrote the first chapter, the anatomy of the interphalangeal joints, which is still a very great chapter. And in the first line in his introduction is, the proximal interphalangeal joint has been termed by Ray Curtis as the epicenter of hand surgery. And Ghazi Rayan in 2003 wrote an article in Journal of Hand Surgery about Raymond Curtis, the prototypical hand surgeon. And he worked for a short time together with Sterling Bonnell, and was one of the first pioneers of hand surgery. And he said the PIP is the epicenter of hand surgery. Another great book is by Richard Eaton, Joint Injuries in the Hand, about these joints, and there were illustrations by my favorite hand surgeon, William Littler. And they quote Walt Whitman in the beginning of this book, and he is quoted by, "And the narrowest hinge of my hand puts a scorn on machinery." So you can find in many articles that the anatomy of the PIP joint is perfectly configured to its function. But after millions of years of evolution, nearly every structure in the human body is perfectly configured to its function. But it is the epicenter of hand surgery, as we heard. And if you want to learn about it, you look to the greatest anatomy books of the hand. And I show here 9 books, and what you can find about the PIP joint. It's Surgical Anatomy of the Hand by Ulrich Lanz and Hans Martin Schmidt with 4 pages. Kaplan's Functional Anatomy of the Hand with 4 pages. The James Doyle and Michael Botti Surgical Anatomy of the Hand and Upper Extremity, 4 pages. In the Great Atlas of Surgical Anatomy by Zancoli and Cozzi, 0 pages. In Landsmet book, only 2 pages. In another book of Zancoli, The Structural and Dynamic Basis of Hand Surgery, 0 pages. In Hughes Atlas of Hand Surgery, 3 pages. In Adalbert Capangi's book about anatomy and biomechanics of joints, only 2 pages on the PIP joint and the finger joints. And by Makoto Tamai, The Grasping Hand, the newest book, 5 pages on the PIP joint anatomy. And the illustrations on these books are rare, and also in all publications you can find about the anatomy of the PIP joint, I think about 50 to 100 good articles in the world. There are only a few illustrations. And as you know, I can do illustrations, and so I should do. Or as Käthe Kollwitz said in German, eine Gabe ist eine Aufgabe. That means in English, a gift or a skill, the meaning of a skill, is a task or a duty. So I made several illustrations in the last weeks, very new illustrations that have never been shown before. If you see here the hand, if it's the outstretched fingers, you have a plane, and if you flex a little bit more, it seems to be that the fingers are all flexing in one line to this position. And you have an area that you can reach with the fingers, about 300 to 400 square centimeter. But in the half of a second, you can put the fingers together to less than 1 square centimeter. And for this motion, you need an interaction of many joints. The interaction of the CMC 2 to 5 joints, which have here, you can see here the motion area and a small supination and pronation movement. And you have the MP joints with the converting axis of flexion and extension with a slight pronation and supination. And the movement of the MP joints, it's in the outstretched fingers, and the fixed motion to the lateral, to the ulnar and radial side, if the MP joints are flexed. This is the motion area of the fingertip about the MP joints. So all axes of the MP joints, and you can see here on the left side that the axis of the metacarpal 2 and 5 entering in another point, then the MP, the metacarpal 3 and 4. But the proximal phalanges converging a little bit, and the PIP joints are also converting. So if I see this, I often think to William Wheeler. I think nobody knows him because he was no surgeon and no hand surgeon, but he was a specialist in ants. And in 1911, he introduced the term superorganism. A superorganism might be defined as any aggregate of individual organisms that behaves like a unified organism. Each individual within the superorganism has a specific role to play and is highly dependent on the other individuals performing their individual role successfully. The hand is no superorganism, but the hand and the fingers, and especially the fingers joints, are like a super organ. And I want to show today inflection of the fingertips, the fingertips approaching a common target. But is the PIP joint a simple hinge joint? A hinge joint has a stationary axis, and the motion is perpendicular to the longitudinal axis of the shaft. So the first part is anatomy of the bony parts and of the joint and the joint geometry. Here is the lateral view. You can see here the dorsal tubercle on the base of the second phalanx, the ridge for the A4 poly, the lateral tubercle, and the palmar tubercle. Then the flat area, a central impression on the head of the proximal phalanx, the ridge of the A2 pulley, and a nutrition canal for one small artery. And by the way, because I don't come back to this point, in many cases you can find here a small Pacini's body directly in the area of this artery, and this is perhaps for measuring the blood supply of the bones. If we look from dorsal and from palmar to the PIP joint, you can see this, and you have the insertion of the intermedius tractus and the insertion of the flexor digitorum superficialis, of the superficial flexor. And you have the insertions of the collateral ligaments here in light blue, and the insertions of the palmar plate, especially at the critical corner, I will show a little bit later, and the chacrane ligaments. And this is the area of the synovial fluid. in the axial view from distal to the head of the proximal phalanx, you can see the trapezoid shape of the head, and the palmar margin is twice of the dorsal margin. And the head of the proximal phalanx and the base of the second phalanx are not congruent. You can see it if you look here to the axis, that is not congruent, and especially the greatest radius and the greatest impression of the base and the condyles. And the diameter is very different. And if you can see here from the lateral side, the base of the second phalanx has about 100 to 110 degrees about the sector of the center of rotation, but the head of the proximal phalanx has much more, 230 to 240 degrees. If you look to the longitudinal sagittal section of the finger and you look to the PIP joint, you can see the cartilage, and the cartilage has the greatest thickness, which is about 1 millimeter at the palmar surface between 40 and 60 degrees of flexion. The cartilage of the base of the proximal of the second phalanx, it's much thinner. It's only 0.5 millimeter. If you look very closely to the curvature, you can see that the radius of curvature of the base of the second phalanx is highly significantly larger on all fingers than the radius of the first phalangeal head. And if you make circles here around, you can see the center of the bone area of the head in red and the center of the radius of the base here in blue. And the sagittal layer, in the sagittal layer, the difference is approximately 30%. If you look to the transverse section, you can have here the condyle depressions. They have a much greater radius than the condyle itself. And this is about 49% of difference. If you look again from dorsal and from palmar, you can see the condyles are not symmetrically, they are asymmetric. And you can see here there's a converging to the middle finger or the space between middle and ring finger. If you extend the fingers and then flex, there's an additional movement with a supination of 9 degrees in the second digit to 12 degrees of pronation in the little finger. You can see here it differs from person to person, and then sometimes it's more pronation and sometimes it's more supination, or all supination and all pronation, but this is the majority of the patients, and the humans have these angulation and rotation in the joints. Here you can see again the movement of the fingers from the axial plane. And from dorsal to palmar, you can see that the index and middle finger, that the ulnar condyle is prominent, and in the ring and little finger, the radial condyle is prominent. Each joint is unique, and they are asymmetric in shape and contour. And if you expect the axis, you see a diverging axis. But, and this is a PIP paradox number 1, the bicondyle axis shows a diverging direction, and the axis of flexion and extension show a converging direction. If you look from the axial view, as before, and the dorsal, you can see that this is a PIP paradox number 2, The further distal condyle, which you think that is supposedly larger, has a smaller radius. That's the PIP paradox number 2. And there's always only a current movement axis of the PIP joint. The movement is a combination of rolling and sliding. The range of motion is, you can see here, between 10 and 110 degrees. And the Landsmeer in 1955 said that the axis of rotation shifts palmally and a little bit proximally. And in 2013, there was a very great investigation with Andreas Schweitzer. And this is the axis of rotation for all movement, for the whole movement area. And this is a curve. It's exactly a Burmester curve, like in the knee joint. You can see here. That's the Burmester curve. That's the areas of, and the contact area, you can see here, is about 100 square millimeter, and it's depending on the movement of and the flexion of the PIP joint. It changes, as you can see here on the top. Oh, I can't go further. What's that? The complete range of motion in the PIP joint is here and on the top illustration in red, between 7 degrees and 101. The functional range of motion, which you need in daily practice, is between 23 degrees and 87 degrees. And the best angle for arthrodesis is between 40 and 55 degrees. On the lower illustration, you can see the diameter of the PIP joints and the extensor and flexor tendon, and the distance between the area of rotations and the tendons. And in the PIP joint, it's about 7.5 millimeter, and that means that with 10 degrees, the tendons move about 1.5 millimeter. Then we can go to the anatomy of the capsule, the ligaments, and the palmar plate. You can see here the proximal phalanx and the second phalanx and the complete unopened capsule. And if you open in this area and open the joint, it looks like here. You have the collateral ligament, the intercondylar cavity, and the dorsal plate, and the accessory collateral ligament that was first described by Emanuel Kaplan. And you can see the palmar plate with the check-rein ligaments that were described by Eaton in 1971, in the book that I have shown before, and Raymond Curtis' critical corner. You can see here the intercondylar depression, the intercondylar ridge, that you can find also on the dorsal and the palmar plate, and the condylar depression and the condyles. And we have here a flat area described by Kuczynski from Edinburgh in 1968. If you remove the head of the proximal phalanx and open all the structures that are attached to the base of the second phalanx, you can see the dorsal plates, you can see the collateral ligament and the accessory collateral ligament and the palmar plate. Here you can see the dorsal plate again in a partially removed head to show a good insight in the PIP joint without the head. And you can see here the dorsal plate. And the dorsal plate has several functions. It is for the stabilization of the central extensor tendon. It is a participation on stabilization of the PIP joint, increase the moment arm of the extensor tendon. It's for the prevention of attrition of the extensor tendon and involvement with the circulation of synovial fluid. Here we have a closer look to the palmar plate. You can see the check vein ligaments that are inserting to the bone and to the base of the distal end of the A2 pulley. And on the lateral side, there's a connection to the accessory collateral ligament, but there's a space between the cartilage and the palmar plate in the middle. It's only attached at the lateral borders of the palmar plate, and only on the very palmar side there's connection of the palmar plate to the bone. As you can see here, the palmar plate from lateral palmar. This is the palmar plate with the check vein ligaments and the insertions at the critical corner of Curtis. And there's a strong adhesion in this area, but a slight, a small connections to the bone in the central area. The palmar plate has a thickness of 1.5 millimeter, and that's a third of the radius of the condyle. And this is for increasing the moment of the superficial tendon and of course of the deep flexor tendon by 25%. It's an important function. And if you look to these illustrations I have made several years before, if we would have not the A2 and A4 pulleys, which are here blue, and if you would have not a palmar plate, the deep flexor tendon would compress all bones together. But with the palmar plate and the A4 and A2 pulleys, you can see the curved line of the flexor tendon, and this is much more effective for flexing the fingers. Of course, the palmar plate is for stabilizing and preventing hyperextension. This was a chronic instability after an injury. But we have some more things that we have to talk about. Here is the PIP opened and the head of the proximal phalanx removed. You can see here the collateral ligament and the accessory collateral ligaments and the complete area of the synovial fluid. You can see the dorsal recesses below the tractus intermedius of the extensor apparatus, and you can see the palmar recesses just above or just dorsal on the arteries that supplying here the flexor tendon and the joint capsule. And you can see here on the dorsal border of the collateral ligament the lateral recesses. Here you can see the synovial fold in an opened joint just below in the area of the accessory collateral ligament and running over the collateral ligament. Here, this is the space for the synovial fluid. You have a dorsal recesses and a palmar recesses and a lateral recesses, or two lateral recesses. And this is a very important thing. During flexion and extension, the synovial fluid is coming from dorsal to the palmar side, and there's a pump mechanism that with extension, the pressure of the palmar plate and the flexor tendons to the palmar recesses pulls or pumps the synovial fluid to the dorsal recesses, and if you flex the fingers, the extensor tendon presses the fluid to the palmar side, and that's very good for the cartilage if there is a good movement of the synovial fluid. But this is only the passive motion. If you have an active motion, as Saito showed in ultrasound, there's also a pump mechanism with a flexor tendon. This is much greater. It's a complete palmar plate is pulled palmarly by the flexor tendons, as you can see here. So the palmar plate has also very important functions. It provides crucial stability against hyperextension, lateral displacement, and torsional forces. It acts like as a meniscus between the middle phalangeal base and the proximal phalangeal head. It forms part of the intercavity lining of the PIP joint, provides a smooth gliding surface for the flexor tendon, and increases the moment arm for flexor tendons and the direction of the forces and the involvement with the circulation of synovial fluids. Now we come to the collateral ligaments. You can see here the stronger collateral ligament and the a little bit transparent accessory collateral ligaments. Here again, with this view from the palmar side, you can see here the collateral ligament, and it's not ending at the palmar on the lateral tubercle, but there are some fibers are entering on the palmar surface of the second phalanx, as you can see here. The accessory collateral ligament is a little bit transparent. It's not so thick in this, and it's entering here, this area, also a little bit to the critical corner and to the radial and ulnar side of the palmar plate. And some of the fibers of the collateral ligament also entering the A4 pulley, and the fibers of the accessory collateral ligament have also contact to the A3 pulley. If you look to the different parts of the collateral ligament, you can see here in different colors the fibers, as you can see here, and on the left side, that's the MP joint. On the right side, the PIP joint. And you can see here the origin and insertion of the different parts of the collateral ligaments in extension and flexion, as you can see here. And here you can see not the origin, but the complete tendon parts. You can see here the dorsal parts in red and the most palmar parts in blue, and the parts between. And you can see here in extension, they are all in line, they are nearly parallel, and in flexion, they are covering partially to each other, as you can see here in another illustration. And the length of the ligaments, it's about 1 centimeter, 10 millimeters, and you can see here the different lengths of these ligaments. You can see here the green one. It is in extension, it's less than 8 millimeters, and it's longer in flexion, and the palmar parts of the collateral ligaments are stretched in extension and are a little bit shorter in flexion of the joints. If you look again, these lines are always crossing here. That means that the tension of all ligaments is nearly the same. It's about in 45 to 50 degrees. And you all know the problem of the PIP joint. If there was an injury, the joint is swelling after this fracture here, like here, and the ligaments go in this position. It's about 40 degrees, and in this position the ligaments have the same tension. And you can see here the big blood inside the joint, the blood volume, and the biggest blood volume that is possible in the joint is at 40 degrees. So from the view of the ligaments and from the view of the cavity, the best position for the PIP joint of an injured joint is 40 degrees. But as you can see here on the palmar plate, here on the proximal area of the palmar plate, the check vein ligament are here in a sigmoid form, and after this injury, you will have a contracture in this position. And the ligaments also get smaller and smaller, and they are scarring in this position. And that's why we have so great problems with the 30 to 40 degrees position of the PIP joint. Here again. Now we come to the extensor and flexor tendons at the PIP joint. Here you can see the anatomy of the PIP joint, and as you can see here, the flexor tendons have the vincula, the superficial and deep, and you can see here directly at the PIP joint you have here the A3 pulley and the campus chiasma directly over the palmar plate, and the vascularization, the vincula longa and vincula brevis at this PIP area, or here in a greater solution. And intraoperatively, you can see here the chiasma of the superficial flexor tendon and the blood supply of the profundus tendon. Here is the palmar plate, and here is the A3 pulley. Now we go to the extender tendons, and these are all the extender tendons from the dorsal side, from the palmar side, and from the lateral side. And it's very difficult to understand. So I colored each functional part in another color, and you can see here it's much easier to understand. It's a sagittal band, the central band, the lateral bands, and the lumbrical muscle, and here in orange the Landsmeer's ligaments, and in pink the lateral part of the central band that's entering here the DIP joint. Here from the lateral side you can see again it's opened here the extensor hood, and you can see here the pink tendon here, and this is a very important part here, because this part, and it's called the lateral part of the central slip, that's entering to the DIP joint. And Winslow several hundred years ago said this is a diamond concept, and this part I don't call the lateral part of the central band. I call these fibers the intensifying fibers. It's much easier to understand. And here in orange, you can see here the Landsmeer's ligament, as you can see here. Here is the transverse and the Cleland's ligament, also in the PIP area, as you can see here. I call it the intensifying fibers because if the finger in stretched position, these fibers that come close together and are more on the dorsal part. And if the more you flex, these intensifying fibers run to the lateral side. And this is a view from the dorsal. If you look here to the left picture, you can see the intensifying fibers in extension on the dorsal side. And the more you flex, these fibers run palmar to the axis of rotation, as you can see here. So if you want to extend the finger, these intensifying fibers go run more to the dorsal, slip more to the dorsal side, where they help and increase the extension. And if you want to flex the finger, these intensifying fibers decrease the tension on the extension side and help to flex the PIP joint, the intensifying the flexion and the intensifying the extension. So these fibers are very important, and the gliding of these fibers is very important for this movement. Also here the Landsness fibers on the right side, you can see here in orange. And if we have here the joint opened and then closed, and then we have here the synovial cavity, and you can see here on top of the collateral ligaments the lateral recessive for the gliding of the tractus lateralis of the intensifying fibers and the oblique landsmeres. As you can see here in the next illustration, you can see here the central band and the dorsal plate, and here this is the pars lateralis of the central band. These are the intensifying fibers, and here this the oblique landsmeres ligament, and here the synovial recessus on top of the collateral ligaments, and below the collateral ligaments you have here the flat area, and in this area the collateral ligaments are gliding. So that's very important that you have here a smooth area for gliding of the collateral ligaments. And you have also a recessus here below. Now to the vessels and nerves as it's a PIP joint. You can see here, these are some of the vessels, and you can see here the rich blood supply of the synovium and of the recessus. It's a rich blood supply, and an anatomist, a friend of mine, said the rich blood supply of the joints is important for warming of the joint. I think that's another point what could be important. Here you can see the nerve supply to the fingers, and in violet you can see here the nerve supply to the PIP joint, which could be important if you want to do an denervation. There are from the palmar digital nerve 2 branches from the palmar side, and the distal part of the dorsal nerve also has here small branches, as you can see here. And now to the most important part, the biomechanics of the PIP joint. In school I loved mathematics and physics, but today if I look to the biomechanical books, you can see something like this, and I must say I don't understand nothing. I think I would need some weeks or months or years to understand all this, but to understand the physiology of the joints, it is not so so difficult if you have some tricks. If you look, this is a very good illustrations from the Schmidt-Lanz book surgical anatomy of the hand with an with beautiful illustration. I think most of you know them. But if you compare the MP joint and the PIP joint, they look nearly similar, very similar, so that you can't understand why should we do the hand in intrinsic position, that you have the preservation of the joints. Yes, why are the ligaments taut in the MP joint in a 90 degrees flexion and relaxed in 0 degree, and we have different conditions in the PIP joint? Why? I did not understand for a long time, but today I understand. The MP joint, you can see here, is dorsal monocondylar, and on the palmar side, bicondylar. And the MP joint is on the palmar, it's much wider than dorsal. The P joint is also palmar side much wider than the dorsal, and the PIP joint is dorsal and palmar, both are bicondylar. That's one point. And if you look to the MP joint on the top and the PIP joint on the bottom, you can see the shape. And the shape is trapezoid. So if you look to the ligaments, the collateral ligaments, they have they are in this position, in the extended position. They have the small direction. If they are more flexed, the ligaments run over the widest point at the base of the trapezoid. So this acts like an increasing hypermochlion. The trapezoid on the bottom, an increasing hypermochlion. The second is you have to think of a concept of two different rotation centers. You have the rotation center of the bone. The head of the MC head has a rotation center, and the head of the proximal phalanx has a rotation center. But this is different from the rotation center of the ligaments. And in the MP joint, the rotation center of the ligaments is on the dorsal part, much more dorsal, and the rotation center of the ligaments of the PIP joint is more proximal. And here, if you have this, you have the cam effect. If you have the short position of the joint, the ligament is relaxed, and if you go to the longer distance, the ligaments are under tension. So in the MP joint, the center of the ligaments is more on the dorsal side. So if you have here a circle, the palmar part of the bone is the cam effect. And in the PIP joint, the center of the ligaments is more proximal. So if you have here a lining, a circle, the distal part of the bone has the cam effect. So if we look to the MP joint, this is the area of centers of rotation. I have to say it again and again. There is no center of rotation. You have an area of center of rotations, and it's here in blue. And you have the area of centers of rotation for the ligament more on the dorsal side. So if you flex the MP joint, this ligament goes under tension. So we have here in blue the hypermochleon effect, the increasing hypermochleon, and here the cam effect. And in the MP joint, we have here in the stretched extended finger, we have no hypermochleon and no cam effect. So we have the lateral stability is very low. But if you flex to 90 degrees, we have the addition of the hypermochleon effect plus the cam effect. So the flexion of the MP joints strengthens the MP joints maximal. So you have an additional of the two effects for a very strong grip in the fist. In the PIP joint, the area of centers of rotation is here, and the area of the centers of rotation of the ligament is more proximal. So if you flex the finger, the distance is is less. So you have the greatest strengthening of the cam effect at 15 degrees, as you can see here in the on the bottom here. In 15 degrees, we have the greatest cam effect. In 0 degrees, a little bit more, less. And if you go more and more in flexion over 50 or 60 degrees, you have no cam effect anymore. And as I said before, you have also an increasing hypermochleon on the palmar surface. So if you have here the PIP joint, the greatest stability is here at 15 degrees, but also in 90 to 100 degrees. You have a very great stability. And the weakest lateral stability in the PIP joint is at 40 degrees, as I have shown before with a blood synovial, if you have a hematoma inside the synovial space. And so the 40 degrees position is the baddest position for the PIP joint, as you can see here. You have the hypermochleon effect or the cam effect, but nearly not both. That's how the PIP joint acts. And here it was in very old publication from 1993 from Kainan Ahn and Peter Amadeo and Bill Cooney and Ron Linscheid and Minami Kawa. I hope I spoke it in the right way. And they did a cutting section of the PIP joint. And the lateral stability at 500 Newton and 1000 Newton, you can see here, at 40 degrees, they have the lowest stability. And if you cut the dorsal part of the collateral ligament, you have with 500 Newton, you have an less stability, up to 10 degrees. If you cut the complete collateral ligament, you can see here this turkey line, this violet line. If you cut also the accessory collateral ligament, you can open you have a lateral angulation up to 30 degrees in 60 degrees position. If you cut the central band and the lateral band and the palmar plate, you can see here the stabilities of all different structures beginning from the dorsal part of the collateral ligament. If you do it in the contralateral way, if you cut here the palmar plate and the extensor tendons and the lateral band, there's only a very small decrease. You still have a great stability. If you cut both collateral ligaments, you can see here what is the effect. And so the collateral ligaments have the greatest stability. And so I'm at the end, and I hope you've learned a little bit about the PIP joint. Thank you very much.